This is a tragic tale, but it's all true. I don't remember all the details, and Googling it is difficult because so many different cases in our area come up. Cops like to target mentally ill kids all the time, and coupled with the Cash for Kids fiasco locally, I only found one brief mention of this. I remember, way back in 6th grade woodshop class, meeting Alan Chestnut for the first time. Today he'd be labeled autistic and cognitively impaired pretty early on, but this was the 90s and he was poor and raised by his family members with similar mental disabilities. To us, he was a weird kid, very quiet but moody, impaired, slushy speech, disheveled appearance, dirty nails, greasy hair. He would sometimes make random outbursts in class, usually complaining about the temperature in the room or just saying that he was bored. Depending on the teacher, he'd either be quietly settled down with some soft words or berated and sent to the office, and he was frequently getting suspended for it. It was very sad, especially to see him bullied sometimes. Our woodshop teacher was a cranky old bastard named Mr. Van Hart, a rail-thin, highly animated, grumpy, and balding asshole. Mr. Van Hart was exactly like the villain teacher in an 80s movie. He took no crap from anyone, and he loved sending kids to the office, usually while trying to publicly shame them for any perceived slight. Our first day in class, mid-lecture about safety, Alan lets out this long, loud sigh and says, "I'm so bored." I didn't know it then, but that was like a nervous tic for Alan. He wasn't trying to be funny or disruptive, it was like a self-soothing thing. Nobody else knew it yet either, and everyone started laughing. Red-faced and instantly pissed, Van Hart turns to him and just starts screaming at him, saying these low insults and bitterness. It was like watching the drill instructor go to town on Private Pile in Full Metal Jacket, and Alan just started crying and left for the office. The class was dead silent until Van Hart starts launching full volume back into the safety lecture. The next day in class, we all were dead silent again, anticipating trouble as soon as Alan came walking in, head lowered, with his long greasy hair hiding his face. You could tell he was trying to be invisible and just sat at his desk as quickly as he could. The tension started to lift as Van Hart just started reiterating the safety stuff from the day before and herding us from the classroom to the woodshop itself. We all paired off to work on our projects. We were using the jigsaw to cut pieces of wood for a birdhouse. One pair would use it, then take their pieces to their stations to assemble them. Everyone was quietly talking and doing their thing while Van Hart supervised the cuttings. But Van Hart was distracted by two kids arguing at their stations when it was Alan's turn to use the saw. I will never forget hearing Alan say, "I had an accident. I have to go home now." He said it in an almost happy way, like he just pulled a fast one on someone. A girl started screaming, and soon quite a few of us were too. Alan had just severed the thumb off of his left hand. Blood was pumping all over the table and turning the dusty yellow floor bright crimson. You could smell it in the air. "Oh, Jesus Christ, Alan, what the hell?" Van Hart screamed and ran to him after grabbing a handful of shop towels and pressing them down over his stump. Alan started quietly crying from the pain as he was let out of the class. One girl ran to the shop sink and threw up into it. Another girl made it halfway to a trash can. Soon, the principal, janitor, and counselor came rushing in to calm everything down. It was an effing mess. The kid he'd been partnered with would happily tell an embellished version forever after, about how Alan told him he was bored and wanted to go home so he cut off his own thumb like a psychopath, and how he laughed about it afterwards. That got amplified and spread by the end of the day. That's probably why, a couple years later, everyone was sure Alan murdered his elderly next-door neighbor. It was a small town, and word of that day in class gained mythical status. By the end of that year, he'd been pegged as most likely to be the next Jeffrey Dahmer by parents and students alike. It was sad as hell. So, cops go to his neighbor's house for a wellness check. They find the old man had been stabbed to death sometime prior. and they noticed Alan sitting in a chair on his porch, watching the cops like he was watching TV. They then noticed that Alan had a cut on his hand, a fresh one. And that was that. Tried, convicted, and sent to prison at 16 after getting him to fully confess. He spends the next 6 months getting brutally abused by the prisoners there. What they did to him, I'll leave up to your imagination. Then, the DNA evidence comes back. He didn't do it. The whole town was so sure the little autistic kid had done it. The hell he went through in jail, I wouldn't wish on anyone. He was awarded a lot of money from the state of Maryland for his troubles while being falsely imprisoned. It was rumored to be millions, but it probably wasn't close to it. Hopefully, though, it was enough that he would never have to work anymore. I heard he was completely nonverbal after what they did to him in that prison. Alan still lives there to this day. His elderly parents are dead and he lives there alone. He often sits on his porch, just watching traffic all day. I hope somebody is helping him. I hope that he's not always alone. I'm 31, female, and though I may not be considered old to tell you guys this story, I have to take you back years ago. At the time of this incident, I will call it, I was 24. Working for a popular convenience store chain in my area, I had managed to make my way up to the promotional ladder to assistant manager. And a lot of the times I was the closing manager on duty. Not an issue, typically. Well, I was employed in a suburban area of North Carolina, and my store didn't close until 10 p.m. I had worked plenty of closing shifts myself, despite the climbing crime rate in my area. I'm the type of female that thinks of herself as someone who can handle herself. One night, though, this would all change for me, because until you must handle yourself, do you truly know if you can or can't? I came into work that Friday at my normal shift start time of 3 p.m., and I was scheduled as usual to close. My last employee would end his shift at 8 p.m., and typically after that time there was nothing really to do in the store except for being at the front, cleaning, or doing other closing duties. Once those were finished, though, I found myself spending free time on my phone until locking up and clocking out. Part of the closing duties was always taking the trash out to the dumpster behind the store. This night was no different. Aside from the creepy darkness, the back lot was illuminated by one light in the back of the parking lot. I had never had any issues with taking the trash out, and none of my employees had had any issues either. This night would prove to be very different. As I approached the dumpster and threw in the bags of trash, I heard a squelching sound, the obvious sound of, in my mind, an animal possibly eating something, maybe another animal. So I grabbed a long stick and was going to use it to hit the side of the dumpster and frighten away the animal I thought was there. I stepped to the side and peeked around the back corner of the dump, and I made eye contact with a man who was crouching down. Looking over his shoulder with a knife in his teeth, we locked stares. As we stared at each other, he continued to cut into something. No, I shouldn't say cut. He was sawing into something shrouded in the darkness and producing a lot of blood. Not wasting time, I maintained eye contact with him as I backed away slowly, without taking my eyes off of him. He grinned with the knife still stationed between his teeth and began standing. I still had no idea what he was sawing into, and honestly I wasn't trying to spend much time figuring it out. Still, with eyes locked, I backed away faster, timing when I was going to turn and run for my life into the store and lock it. About halfway through the back lot, this man now on his feet, eyes still locked, he began walking towards me. When I made my decision to run, it was like he read my mind and charged. I took off with every bit of speed I could muster and made it to the back door of the store and ran inside, shutting it right as he reached the door himself. Locking the door and setting the alarm, I dug my phone out of my pocket and called the police. All the while, this stranger is banging on the door of the store, yelling in some sort of odd language, one I have never heard. About 20 minutes later, as I was hiding between the aisles in the store because the entire front of the store was all glass windows and my creep of a new friend could see me right through them should he look. There was a tapping sound on the glass door, and at first I froze, remembering that the dumpster dude had a knife, and it sounded very similar to what a knife would sound if it was tapped against a glass surface. But soon after that sound, an officer announced his presence, and I slowly crept from my dark hiding spot to see 3 local police officers there with flashlights. I went to the back door and let them in, explaining as we made our way to the back of the store that the guy had quit banging and yelling quite some time ago, and I didn't think he was still there. There was no chance though that he was able to clean up everything from behind the dumpster in the short amount of time that it was quiet. I turned the alarm off, unlocked, and opened the back door for them to go out. I followed close behind, letting my curiosity of what they would find guide me. One of the officers asked me to point them in the direction of the area I had seen the man. I pointed to the only dumpster in the lot, telling them that the man was crouched behind the dump sawing into something that was producing a lot of blood. Just as I finished explaining this, the officer next to me said to the others, "Y'all take a look at this." As he shone his light on the asphalt of the parking lot, we could all make out very clear impressions of bare human footprints in what seemed to be a brownish red liquid going across the lot to the store and fading out about a quarter of the way back from the store to the dumpster. I guess trying to rule out if I was playing some cruel joke, 2 of the 3 officers pointed their flashlights at my feet. Seeing that I was definitely wearing my non-slip black work shoes and no blood was apparent anywhere on my person, they dismissed it. Approaching the dumpster, an officer placed himself in front of me. They all 3 drew their weapons, and one shouted in a very official and stern voice, "Police officer, if you're back there, show yourself. Come out with your hands up." No one came out, and no sounds were made. Turning the corner, the officers all sighed in unison as they came upon a pool of blood, a knife, and no person. There was no animal, no body, nothing. Just blood, and a lot of it. They marked off the scene with a yellow crime scene tape and began gathering evidence, eventually allowing me to leave after writing down my statement and what I had witnessed. The man behind the dumpster was apprehended a couple days later in his home, which was only a few miles behind the store. He was arrested and questioned, and apparently after hours of interrogation, the man admitted to abducting and killing a child within his trailer park, and what I witnessed was the dismemberment of this child. His pursuit of me was to make sure I saw nothing, and he wanted to ensure that if I did or didn't, I wouldn't be able to talk about what I had or had not seen. Following this incident, I refused to close the store alone again, and willingly my store manager agreed. It wasn't long after this, though, that I took a position within the same company, just at another store, in what seems to me a safer area. All I know is that I am glad they caught this man, because this man was looking for me. He was apprehended a few hours after coming into the store and asking the on-duty cashier for me by name. Knowing the situation, the cashier then, and now a close friend of mine, called in the suspicious man asking for me by name. He was trying to get her to tell him when I worked again, if I worked often, and for my phone number. Thank goodness she's one of the smarter ones and understood there's a policy in place that prohibits the release of that information to anyone. I used to be a police officer in the southern US, part of a tactical team that handled high-stakes situations. One day, we were called to assist in a hostage situation. A man was holding a gun to a pregnant woman's head, forcing her to flee from the police. The pursuit had been going on for 3 hours and was heading into our city. Our department had better funding, more advanced tactical capabilities, and greater manpower, so we moved ahead to intercept. As the chase entered our jurisdiction, the suspect's vehicle crashed while trying to navigate our congested freeways. Both the man and the woman were still moving inside the wrecked car, so we quickly set up the perimeter around the vehicle, shielding nearby motorists from potential danger. I was the designated marksman that day, which meant I needed to find a vantage point to set up overwatch. My usual partner was training a newer officer, so I was working with someone different. This caused a slight delay in getting set up. Nothing major, but it's amazing how much shorthand you develop after working with someone for 5 years. Once I had my sights trained on the target area, the helicopter unit above reported significant movement in the front seat. They hovered lower to get a clearer view and confirmed that the man had pulled the woman onto his lap, using her as a human shield. Just as this was relayed over the radio, I confirmed the visual description. The woman suddenly began kicking the windshield, desperately trying to escape. In that moment, 2 muffled gunshots rang out. From my vantage point, I could tell they came from the inside the vehicle. The muzzle flash and the violent shattering of the windshield made it all clear. This immediately triggered the react team, who shifted from standby to rescue mode. They moved swiftly toward the vehicle, a 5-man stack advancing with precision. I watched as they broke the side windows to gain access, issued loud commands, and then, without hesitation, shot the aggressor point blank in the face. His head split open like an exploded watermelon. The woman was pulled from the vehicle and given immediate medical attention. He worked on her right there on the freeway for about 3 minutes, but the massive traffic backup made it nearly impossible for EMS to reach us in time. In a desperate move, officers loaded her into a squad car and rushed her to the hospital, but tragically, both she and the child succumbed to their injuries. That incident left me with intense PTSD, something I'm still working through to this day. About a month later, I responded to another hostage situation at a home. Being the first tactical unit on the scene, I became the point of contact with the suspect. We built a rapport, and I was able to talk him out of the house and into the front yard safely. He was taken into custody by the waiting react team without any violence. I saw this as the universe providing me with some sense of balance after the trauma of the previous incident. Shortly after, I retired early from police work, feeling that my 1-in-1 hostage incident outcomes were enough for me. I didn't regret leaving for a second, but I do miss helping people. A woman came into my car dealership to look at a truck, intending to pay in cash. She wore expensive jewelry but acted very strangely. The whole time, I was trying to figure out if she was on drugs, and ultimately decided I wasn't comfortable going on a test drive with her, especially since it was almost closing time. There was just something off about her. After closing up, I watched as she wandered through the lot, looking at cars. The next day, I saw her mugshot on TV. She had bludgeoned an older woman to death with a hammer in her home and robbed her. This crime had been committed the night before she visited our dealership, which explained the jewelry she wore while trying to purchase her getaway car. I can't help but feel like I escaped that situation with my life, and I'm so glad I trusted my gut on that one. I can still see this in my mind like it happened yesterday. I live in a very rural area in Tennessee, and this happened in the summer of either 92 or 93 when I was a preteen. We used to have serious issues with people dumping unwanted, worn-out items and garbage down our beautiful hillsides and ravines. At that time, illegal dumping sites were everywhere because our one waste disposal monopoly didn't offer bulk pickup. In this part of the state, the economic disparity is obvious. You have some of the poorest people and others with multiple mansions and vacation homes. It was August in Tennessee, which means scorching heat and enough humidity to make breathing slightly uncomfortable. Many describe it as the swamp butt capital of the state. Anyway, we had just experienced an extraordinarily rare murder in our county. It was all anyone was talking about, dominating conversations in churches and beauty salons. The victim was largely unknown, a woman in her early 30s, and not wealthy. I didn't know her, nor did anyone else. She had moved there less than a year ago, kept to herself, and had not been reported missing. Just before our summer break ended, this woman was found at the base of a steep incline, deep in one of our densely wooded areas, by some folks who were out for a nature hike. They discovered her at the base of a large illegal dump on a winding dirt road that was barely wide enough for one vehicle. Even creepier, the road was named Bone Road. When she was found, she had lost everything from the neck up, but both her upper and lower body were recovered. Her killer had not been caught. My mom, born and raised here, was of strong, goofy stock. She was always been my best buddy, even when disciplining my brother and me. She was loved by every student she ever taught. Our friends adored my goofy mama, often telling me how lucky I was to have her. My dad, a pharmacist in our area, was smarter than most and happy to fill a lost or forgotten prescription even late into the night. Though not from here, he was well known because of his job. Everyone knew my mama because she and most of our huge family had been here since our ancestors settled in the 1800s. The rest of her family lived in Middle Tennessee. On that day in August, we had been at a family reunion picnic at the beautiful natural lake near our home. Suddenly, a scattered thunderstorm popped up, bringing our get-together to an end. It was just me and my mom on the ride home, and we decided to play Sherlock Holmes and Watson. We wanted to see the crime scene. I know, brilliant. My dad was at work, and my brother was with a friend. There was no GPS, Alexa, Siri, or Google Earth, not even MapQuest. My dad, being on our school board, had been given a highly detailed map of our entire county. Since neither of us knew how to reach Bone Road, we agreed that this map would be our guide. We went home, grabbed the map, and set out like we were Magellan. We eventually found the place and headed to the spot. Being the ignorant rubberneckers we were, we just planned to drive past the dump site. I can't explain how creepy this place was. A murder dump in the middle of nowhere, on a road that started with blacktop, transitioned to gravel, and then to good old dirt. It was mid-afternoon, but the sudden rain on the August ground made the area steamy. Literal steam was emanating from the road, the fields, the woods, everywhere, but that just added to the thrill of our folly. As we approached the location, there was a blind curve, making it impossible to see the place until you were right up on it. When we rounded that corner, we saw we were not alone. A very dirty man had his very dirty truck pulled over at the dump, just far enough to allow us to pass. Sure, Joe Dirt could have just been another looky-loo like us, but he gave off a creepy vibe, just standing by his truck looking down into the dump. It wasn't a sheriff officer. We know all our local authorities, and they had cleared the location a day or so before. Anyone could access the area. As we squeezed past his truck, he was standing on the passenger side of our car. I was 12 or 13, so he was on my side as we passed, close enough for me to see his only 2 teeth clear as day. He just smiled in this creepy, almost leering way. Not nice, but not friendly. We got past him and thanked the Lord that Mr. Two Teeth hadn't followed us. We agreed we would reach the end of Bone Road and get out of there. Oh, but you know there's a but. We reached the end of Bone Road, which ended at a field. Bone Road was a dead end, no pun intended. My mom said the words I had been screaming in my head. Oh, We had no choice but to do a 5-point turn and go back the way we came. Oh, I bet he's gone now. That was my mom's feeble attempt to soothe us both. Guess what? He was still there. Still smiling his huge, two-teeth smile. Now, as my adult self reflects on this, he could have come after us, knowing we would be cornered, but neither of us had ever been accused of being too rational. We made it out unscathed, of course, and my dad hit the roof when he heard about our afternoon adventure. But, yes, there's one more but, days later, our newspaper heralded the good news. The murderer was caught. The woman had been killed by a boyfriend turned stalker. She had moved here from a town about 45 minutes away to get away from him, but he found her. He drove around with her body in his truck before dumping her. Happily ever after? Not quite. As we stared down at this guy's mugshot, it was real. Mr. Two Teeth was her killer. We never told my dad that part. Mr. Two Teeth was convicted of first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. He will die in the state prison system, serving life with no parole. Still, Mom and I promised we would never be so dumb again. We still have weird adventures, but not to freaky, remote murder dump sites on unknown terrain with no one knowing where we are. We really could have met our literal dead end. It's an odd thing, knowing that you had been face to face with the brutal murderer not once, but twice. In college, from 2008 to 2014, I was an avid metal detectorist. I had discovered an old military trail and river crossing deep into a secluded portion of the woods that I was sure few others knew about. One winter morning, I finally decided to explore it with my metal detector. The trail was about a mile or two from a city park, along the South Concho River in San Angelo, Texas. I parked my truck, gathered my gear, including a serrated knife for digging, and began my trek through the raw woods and brush toward the trail. About halfway through the trees, I came across a clearing and found a tent and campsite about 40 yards from the river, very isolated. There were cans scattered around, some clothes, and other items that made it clear someone was using it. I didn't stay long and continued on my way. As I was passing the tent, a haggard-looking man emerged from the brush just a few feet away. We startled each other, and after some innocent chit-chat, he asked what I was doing in the woods. I told him about the old trail, my metal detecting hobby, and lied that it was a well-known site for hobbyists like me. This seemed to make him a bit anxious. He started asking if I had messed with his campsite, and I assured him I hadn't, except for accidentally stepping on one of the cans. He was mostly concerned if I had looked into the tent, which I truthfully hadn't. The man explained that his wife had kicked him out of their apartment a few days ago, and he was staying in the woods until he got back on his feet. This didn't really add up in my mind, but I didn't press further. Finally, I told him I was going to continue on my way. With a weird look on his face, he suggested I avoid going behind his campsite because he had recently used the bathroom there. Whether or not there was fresh fertilizer back there, I had no intention of sticking around any longer. I headed further toward the trail that I wanted to metal detect, but never felt quite comfortable. So I made a quick turn towards the river and headed back to my truck rapidly. I didn't see the man again until about 2 years later. His picture was in the local news. He had been apprehended for the murder of his wife. He had killed her and buried her in the exact area of the woods where I encountered him that day. And although I can't recall if that was the very day of the crime, he had, at the very least, just completed the act when we met. As a teenager, I waited tables at a local restaurant to pay for gas for my car. That's where I met Mr. Creep. In my naive mind, he seemed normal at first, despite being 20 years old and wanting to date a 17-year-old. Leaving my job after dark scared me, so I taught myself to get in my car, shut the door, and lock it in one fluid motion. It made me feel safe. One night, I had just gotten into my car when Mr. Creep appeared out of nowhere and yanked my door handle trying to open it. In the split second before he smiled, I looked into his eyes and saw something that chilled my bones. I can't describe the evil I saw. From then on, I was terrified of him but didn't let on because I was afraid of what he might do if I told him I never wanted to see him again. He constantly lied to impress me and tried to find ways to be alone with me, but my instinct was to run, so I avoided him. About 2 weeks later, the restaurant was robbed, and there was significant evidence against Mr. Creep, though not enough for the cops to charge him. I sent all my text conversations with Mr. Creep to the police chief in hopes he would help. Mr. Creep slithered away after that, but I always looked over my shoulder. 5 years ago, he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. He bragged about his top secret military clearance and the huge acreage he owned. It made me nervous, and I felt like he was trying to spring a trap, but I tried to put it out of my mind. Then, today, I was looking at posts about an unsolved murder when I saw his mugshot. He is now facing murder charges and 2 other violent felony charges. I'm so glad he's locked up, but I'm overwhelmed by how correct my instincts about Mr. Creep were. I feel like I escaped him.